What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Sorcerer tank. I've mentioned this a lot in previous build videos. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it in each one so far, but not much has changed between Dragonhold and Harrowstorm for pretty much all builds in the game. A few tweaks here and there to better optimize the builds, but for the most part, builds that you saw in Dragonhold are pretty much going to hold true here in Harrowstorm. So Sorc tanks still have the same weaknesses as they had in Dragonhold. If you want to run the Clannfear, you're giving up 2 ability slots rather than 1, and Bound Aegis increases your max magicka, but it's the best option for a tank, so you kind of have to balance that out and potentially put more points in the stamina than you would on any other class. But generally speaking, Sorc tanks are still perfectly viable for pretty much any content in the game. It's just going to be a little bit of tweaking for attributes in order to, and bar space to kind of get the exact utility out of a Sorc tank as you would on like a DK or a Warden tank. So just like the rest of our build videos, no gear here. That's covered in the tanking gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. Also covered in that video are things like which mundas to use, what food you're using, attribute distributions, things like that. So if you're interested in knowing just sort of generic tanking stuff, what gear you should be running, check out that video. This video is specifically tailored towards kind of talking about the skills you should be using, when and why you should be using them, and then kind of a surface look at tanking in general in ESO. So let's go ahead and get started here first with our front bar. So this is our sword and board bar. We have Ransack. You can go with either morph. So the other morph is Pierce Armor. Ransack gives you minor protection. Pierce Armor provides major breach. So just kind of play around with what you need. Generally speaking, Ransack is going to be a little bit more beneficial because you'll be able to get that minor protection all the way up, which you might not necessarily be able to get otherwise on a Sorc tank. There are other ways of getting minor protection as a Sorc tank, but Ransack is definitely the most consistent way to provide that buff. On the other hand, Pierce Armor provides major breach, so if you don't have an alternative source of major breach, something like Drain for example, then you're going to want to run Pierce Armor. Generally speaking, most groups will have another source of major breach, so Ransack is going to be the go-to option here. Next we have Heroic Slash. This is for the minor heroism and the minor maim for the increased ulti gen and the reduction in damage incoming. Then we have Unstable Clannfear. This is going to be our self-heal, so you can activate it for, in this case, 4k magicka and get about a third of your health back. So it's pretty decent self-heal. The downside is it is a pet, so you will need to double bar it. So if we go swap to our backbar really quick, we have the Unstable Clannfear again, so you are eating up an extra ability slot just to have yourself heal. Now you can use another ability, which I'll cover in a few seconds here, but Unstable Clannfear is going to be the most consistent way to get yourself heal and the safest way to get yourself heal. Next we have Empowered Ward, which provides a shield. This does scale off of your max magicka and spell damage. I'm not sure if spell damage, but at the very least max magicka. So it's not going to be as strong here compared to on, let's say, a Sorc DPS, but it's still a pretty decent shield. It's a 7k shield, which essentially acts as additional health, so you get about 20% shield or so. This is before any sort of buffs, so this is obviously going to be stronger when we have our buffs active in our raids. It also provides a minor intellect, so it increases magicka regen by 10% for everybody around you within 20 meters of you. So if you're in a very magicka heavy group, then this can help out their sustain, so definitely something you want to consider running as a Sorc tank. Then we have Bound Aegis. So there was a change to Bound Armaments a few patches ago where it became a DPS skill. So Bound Aegis is going to be the morph you want to pick as a tank. Now while it's slotted, you do have 8% additional magicka regen, max magicka. So because you're getting that 8% additional max magicka, you're going to have to be a little bit more mindful of how many points you're distributing between stamina and magicka, because you want your stamina to be higher than your magicka. Shouldn't be that big of an increase. It's only 8%, and generally speaking, tanks aren't running 30 plus K magicka. So it should be pretty easy to get your stamina higher than your magicka, but it's still something you want to pay attention to as a Sorc tank, especially if you're not an Imperial or a Nord. Let's say if you're playing like a Dark Elf like I normally do, then you're going to want to pay a little bit more attention to your magicka versus your stamina levels while having Bound Aegis slotted here. On top of the additional max magicka, you also gain minor resolve while it's slotted, and when you activate it, you get additional block mitigation, a very hefty amount, 40%, so you can kind of anticipate big hits coming in and get that additional mitigation when you block it. Then for our ultimate, we have Reviving Barrier. You have a few options when it comes to ultimates. We'll cover all of them in a little bit here. But a Reviving Barrier is pretty nice because you can get up to 10% additional Magicka regen from the Magicka Aid passive, and the shield and heal is actually pretty decent as well, especially for progression groups. Then for our backbar, we have Inner Rage as our ranged taunt, Balance for the Magicka, as well as our Major Resolve buff. Unstable Clannfear again, because we do need to double bar since it is a pet. Then we have Dark Deal. This is how we're going to get our stamina back. So basically use this Magicka and converts it into stamina and health. This can be used as a burst heal, but the problem is it does have a 1-second cast time. So you got to be very mindful of when you're using Dark Deal. Obviously you don't want to use it when your enemy is charging up a heavy attack, but if there's a good opportunity to use Dark Deal, then you should take that advantage to cast it. Even if you don't need the stamina or health right away, you do get some additional stamina regen for 20 seconds after you activate Dark Deal. So it's worth it to activate it if you find any opportunity to do so, even if you don't need that initial burst of stamina. Then we have Blockade of Storms. We are running a Lightning Staff, so we need this for our off balance as well as to prop our enchants. It'll become Blockade of Frost if you're running an Ice Staff, and then you should be running Endless Hail if you're running a Bow backbar. And then for our ultimate on the back bar, it should not be the Atronach, it should be Aggressive Warhorn for the Major Force buff. So let's talk about flex spots here. So in terms of flex spots, you don't have a lot as a Sorc tank, and that's mainly because Unstable Clannfear eats up a fair amount of bar space. So really you only have 4 bar spaces on each ability bar here because of the presence of Unstable Clannfear, unless you intend on using something like Dark Deal as your burst heal. So it's a little bit challenging because you definitely have a couple of abilities you need to have on hand. Your Taunt, Heroic Slash, Balance, and things like that. So in terms of flex spots, you don't have that many. On our front bar, both Empowered Ward and Bound Aegis are flex spots, but they're both pretty nice abilities to have, so you might want to keep those there. Then on the back bar, if you don't need the additional stamina regen from Dark Deal, let's say you're very good at heavy attacking to maintain your max stamina, then you can swap Dark Deal out for another ability. But on the back bar, you really only have this one flex spot. So that's one of the big weaknesses of Sorc tanks. You don't have a lot of flex spots if you're running Unstable Clannfear as your self-heal. For your flex spots, though, you have Restraining Prison. This is your hard CC. So this is shot out in front of you for 18 meters, so unlike Choking Talons on a DK, for example, where it is centered on you, you do hit quite a wide area here with Restraining Prison, so pretty nice there. It also provides Major Vitality, so if you need to get a sort of like burst healing done, you can use Restraining Prison, but it's usually not going to be very beneficial. It doesn't work on bosses, for example. You still get the Major Vitality, but you won't be able to mobilize bosses or anything. So it's a nice buff, but it's not going to be very useful in most situations. There are going to be some situations where you might want to consider slotting it for the Major Vitality, though. For an ultimate, you can run Absorption Field. This stuns enemies and also prevents AoEs from occurring within the area. But it also heals anybody within it. It's actually a pretty nice heal, even as a tank using tank stats. 1k every half second, or about 2k every second before buffs. So once we do have buffs, it'll heal for even more. This is actually a pretty strong heal, a pretty nice ultimate for progression groups if you don't want to run Barrier. Under the Daedric Summoning line, not much here. You could run Matriarch as a self-heal instead of Unstable Clannfear. Now the danger is the Matriarch does not heal for as much. It does heal more people, but it also is not guaranteed to hit you either. So the wording says it hits up to 2 other friendly targets, so it might not heal you. The Clannfear, on the other hand, will always heal you, so the wording here is healing you and the Clannfear. So just be mindful if you do decide to use Twilight Tormentor, or Twilight Matriarch rather than Unstable Clannfear. The Clannfear is going to be the more consistent self-heal compared to the Matriarch. Greater Storm Atronach might be beneficial as a Sorc tank, but generally speaking, running Warhorn is going to give you more group DPS. Storm Atro will be better in high DPS scenarios with 4-man content, because you're not really going to be able to get as much DPS across 3 DPS or even 2 DPS compared to running 8 DPS or 9 DPS in a trial. So you might want to use this for 4-man content if you have a very, very strong DPS, but generally speaking, you'll be sticking with Warhorn and not Storm Atronach. Under the Storm Calling line, you can run either Hurricane or Boundless Storm for major resolve. Hurricane will do a little bit more damage, but you won't get the major expedition. You'll get the minor expedition instead. But both grant major resolve, so it's kind of up to you which one you want to pick here. If you need to provide an additional synergy, you can run Lightning Flood. Run Lightning Flood or Liquid Lightning, doesn't really matter which one you choose. Liquid Lightning lasts for longer, but you do need to recast it anyways once the Conduit synergy is used, and you generally won't be using this anyways. It should be sourced from a different sort of place, either magic DPS or healer, that should be providing Liquid Lightning synergy. Power Surge is another way to get some healing done. You can also run the other morph, which is Critical Surge. Now, these only proc off of critical damage for Crit Surge or critical healing for Power Surge. So Critical Surge is going to be more beneficial as a tank, usually, because you won't really be healing too much as a Sorc tank. Power Surge does heal other people, but Critical Surge is generally speaking going to be a little bit better as a Sorc tank if you're looking for a more consistent self-heal. Power Surge just provides an additional AoE heal, which might be more beneficial if you're running something like Symphony or any other set that requires you to heal people in order to proc it. Under the weapons line, Defensive Posture has its uses, both morphs, Absorb Missile, and Defensive Stance. Absorb Missile heals you when you get hit by a direct damage projectile. Defensive Stance reflects it back. Generally speaking, the fights where you are going to be using these morphs, Defensive Stance is going to be more beneficial because you are reflecting the projectile back and dealing damage, compared to Absorb Missile where you're getting healed, and generally speaking, healing should be covered by your healer already. Defensive Stance also provides some additional block mitigation, which could be beneficial anyways. Do make sure to pick up Shield Charge. There is one fight in the game where you're going to want it. That's going to be the Triplets in Vhoff. You don't necessarily need to morph it, but if you decide to morph it, Shield of Assault's going to fit for tanking your tanking role because it gives you a damage shield. Or I talked about Endless Hail as a bow if you're running the bow back bar. You could also pick up Venom Arrow as a ranged interrupt. Destruction Staff, Elemental Blockade, and then Crushing Shock for your ranged interrupt. You might also want to pick up Elemental Drain, especially for 4-man content where you're running 1 tank 3 DPS. That just helps out applying the Major Breach and the Minor Magicka Steel. Under the heavy armor line, Immovable or Unstoppable Brute could be beneficial if you need immunity to knockbacks or disabling effects. It does reduce your movement speed though, so you'll be moving very, very slowly, especially if you're running the Immovable barf. But you can still dodge roll, so you're going to have to dodge roll for 6 seconds if you need to move at all. Other than that, on the Fighter's Guild line, if you need to chain things in, you have to run Silver Leash to chain things in, because Sorcs do not have a class chains. Ring of Preservation could be potentially useful. It grants minor protection to everybody within 5 meters of you, as well as a small self-heal, small healing, and a minor endurance as well, so it could be beneficial. Other than that, let's see here. Eccentric Order line, Meditate, either Morph, Introspection, or Deep Thoughts is basically just additional resource return, but you cannot block because it is a channel. Now, under the Eccentric Order line, you can pick up the Liberation, which gives you major protection while you're channeling, but that's not as much mitigation as you would get from blocking. So just pay attention to your fight if you are using either Morph or Meditate, so that way you don't use it in a bad time where you won't be able to block any sort of effects that are coming towards you. Make sure to have everything unlocked under the Undaunted line. You have Overflowing Altar for minor lifesteal and the Blood Feast synergy, Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy. You have a ranged taunt. You have Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy for the Major Vitality, which is useful in high healing scenarios like Baneful Mark and Execute and Cloud Rest. An Energy Orb to help heal people, as well as the Combustion synergy, which provides additional resources. You'll mainly be using this for the Combustion synergy, but if you're running something like Symphony of Blades, Energy Orb might be one of the better ways to help proc it because it ticks every half second. And under the Alliance War line, you have Echoing Vigor as a potential self-heal. Echoing Vigor is going to be a little bit more beneficial than Resolving Vigor in my opinion, because you can stack multiple sources of Echoing Vigor. So if you have 3 or 4 stacks of it, it actually ends up being better healing done per second compared to just running Resolving Vigor. It's kind of up to you which morph you want to pick though, so you can pick whichever one fits your situation better. Under the support role, make sure to pick up Efficient Purge for the Purge, essentially. We've already covered Reviving Barrier, and again, this is the Magicka 8 passive, which gives you Magicka regen if you have Reviving Barrier or Purge slotted. But that pretty much covers all the abilities that you're going to want to have on hand as a Sorc tank. So now let's go ahead and talk about just sort of surface level kind of tanking for Sorc tanks. Again, the biggest weakness of Sorc tanks is the fact that you are basically giving up a few ability slots for sliding the Clannfear. So you have essentially four ability slots on each bar here because you need to have Clannfear slotted on both bars. So it does limit you in terms of flex spots. Again, on the front bar, you can give up Empowered Ward or Unbound Aegis here. So you have 2 flex spots on the front bar and 1 on the back bar. Here, Dark Deal if you don't need the additional stamina regen that it provides. Compared to that to something like a DK tank where you have 3 on the back bar and up to 2 on the front bar. So definitely less flex than some other classes. So you really only have 3 flex spots as a Sorc tank unless you want to give up Unstable Clannfear, which you could do. But generally speaking, most tanks do want to have some form of a self-heal just in case your healer goes down. So it might not necessarily be worth the trade-off of getting rid of Unstable Clannfear in order to gain 2 ability slots. It's kind of up to you how you want to play around with that. But most Sorc tanks are probably going to want to keep the Unstable Clannfear for that emergency burst heal. Beyond that, though, Sorc tanks play pretty similarly to DK and Warden tanks, anticipating damage and using your damage shields to kind of absorb the big hits here rather than spamming them. Another big weakness of Sorc tanks is the fact that Dark Deal does have a cast time twisted with it. Compare that to something like DK tanks, where all you need is to hit Igneous Shield and you get a little bit of stamina back, or even like a Warden tank, where you just pop Bull Netch and you get the stamina return for 25 seconds. Sorc tanks do need to be a little bit more mindful of when they use their stamina return ability because of that cast time. So it does require you to kind of be very familiar with the fight mechanics and the flow of the fight in order to make good use of Dark Deal. I mentioned this a little bit earlier when I talked about using Dark Deal, but whenever you have an opportunity to do so, I do recommend using Dark Deal, even if you don't need the initial burst of stamina, because the additional stamina regen does occur over 20 seconds. You can pop this and still get a stamina regen going from Dark Deal. So whenever you get an opportunity to do so, I do recommend using Dark Deal as a Sorc tank just to get the stamina regen going over the 20 seconds after the cast. Generally speaking, tanking in ESO kind of fits more in a support role, where your first job is obviously to be a tank, be the damage sponge for the group, but your second job is to buff your allies and debuff the enemy, and that can come from a variety of sources, stemming from either class abilities or from your set. So for example, Ebon counts as a buff to the group for the additional health. That's a set. Alkosh debuffs the enemies, reduces their resistances, which is important to maintain. Now, Sorc tanks don't really provide a lot of group buffs or debuffs that other tanks can't provide. Minor Intellect, for example, that can be covered by a Warden healer running Enchanted Growth, for example. And then obviously Blockade is just universal across all tanking classes. So there's actually not too much that a Sorc tank can provide that a Sorc can't already provide in another role or another class is able to provide a identical buff. So Sorc tanks in terms of group utility don't really have that much. What Sorc tanks kind of are good at is absorbing damage. It's not the same way that Nightblade tanks absorb damage. They don't have high mitigation, but it is you do have quite a bit of additional mitigation. So your damage shield is pretty good. It's the second best after Templars, because it does scale from Max Magicka, and because we have additional health from our Sorc passives for having the Clannfear active, we can invest a little bit more into Magicka if we desire, which helps improve our overall shield strength. So when we are fully buffed, our Empowered Ward can be fairly strong here. Again, just judging from here, it's going to be about a 20% health damage shield, which is actually pretty substantial. Compare that to something like the Blazing Shield from Templars, which is 30%, and I believe DK shield is about 18%, so fairly strong shield here. But the key behind Sorc tanks is taking advantage of Bound Aegis with the 40% block mitigation. Again, you're not going to be using it all the time. It's just too intensive on your Magicka. But if you're able to anticipate big, heavy attacks, you can use Bound Aegis to get a bunch of mitigation and take far less damage than potentially other classes would, like a DK tank. So that's where Sorc tanks really excel, is sort of managing their survivability. You have a pretty decent burst heal with Unstable Clannfear. You got a good, additionally, temporary hit points essentially with Empowered Ward, and some massive block mitigation potential with Bound Aegis here. Generally speaking, Sorc tanks are not going to be quite as strong as DKs. Again, they don't provide a lot of group utility that can't already be provided, and you are giving up quite a bit of flex spots by running Clannfear. But Sorc tanks do have fairly decent mitigation, so you're kind of making a couple of trade-offs here. That pretty much covers it for this video. If you guys are interested in knowing how to play a Sorc tank, unfortunately I don't know many people who main Sorc tanks, but I can say that the core concepts behind tanking don't really vary too much between different classes. So if you find a content creator that does have tanking videos from DK or Warden, you can use those and still learn a lot about how to approach tanking. So I do recommend checking out tanking streams or VODs on Twitch in order to get an idea of how to play a tank. But again, that is it for this video. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.